Well, the British royals have posed for a new formal photograph.
The Kingdom of Avellini had not seen a formal portrait sitting like this one in over a decade. For generations of the royal family gathered beneath the gilded ceiling of the Long Gallery. And if you looked closely at the photograph that would soon circulate in every newspaper across the realm, you would notice one thing above all else. The woman in pale blue, the only splash of color in a sea of muted formal wear, and the tiara resting on her head that had, only weeks earlier, nearly torn the family apart. What happened in the days leading up to that portrait shocked the entire royal household. And it was Crown Prince Anders's reaction, quiet at first, then unshakable, that would leave the palace's oldest courtiers saying they had never seen him like that before. It began on the 3rd of October, just ahead of two major royal engagements, set only days apart. On the 17th, Queen Consort Lavinia was scheduled to host a grand reception for the kingdom's most celebrated authors, a tradition dating back nearly a century. 2 days later, King Frederick would travel to the northern provinces to mark the anniversary of his accession. With both events falling so close together, the palace became a hive of motion. Seamstresses working through the night, florists arriving in convoys, security teams walking the halls with clipboards and furrowed brows. Queen Lavinia took to the preparations with an intensity that unsettled even her own staff. She personally oversaw protocol, guest lists, lighting, catering, and above all wardrobe. She ordered rare orchids flown in from the southern coast and had bespoke silk imported for the drapery in the reception hall. To Lavinia, these two events were not simply ceremonial obligations. They were opportunities, moments to remind the kingdom, and perhaps herself, exactly where she stood. By early October, everything seemed to be falling into place. The guest lists were finalized. Rehearsals had gone smoothly. Security had been briefed twice over. The staff believed, for the first time in weeks, that they could breathe. But behind the polished doors of the private wing, a much smaller problem was quietly becoming a very large one. The problem was a tiara. Within Avellini's royal tradition, tiaras were never simply ornaments. They carried lineage, history, and rank. Each one had been worn by specific women at specific moments, and the choice of which tiara to wear at a state function was scrutinized as closely as any policy address. Lavinia understood this better than anyone, and it was during her final fitting, only days before the author's reception, that she realized none of the tiaras assigned to her suited either of her chosen gowns, a deep sapphire dress for the reception, and an ivory gown for the anniversary events. Some clashed with the fabric. Others were under restoration. One had simply fallen out of fashion in recent years, and Lavinia refused to be photographed in it. As the days ticked by, her frustration sharpened into determination. She began looking beyond her usual collection, and her attention eventually settled on Crown Princess Alara, Anders's wife, who was known to possess several pieces that would pair beautifully with both gowns. One tiara in particular stood out, the larkspur circlet, a delicate, restrained piece closely associated with Alara's public image since she had joined the family. On the evening of the 28th, after a long day of preparations, Lavinia found Alara in a quiet corridor near the east stairwell. "I hear you have the larkspur available," Lavinia said, her voice even. It would suit the reception perfectly. Alara, caught off guard by the directness of the request, hesitated before answering. "I was actually planning to wear it myself. I have engagements of my own coming up, and I built my wardrobe around it." Something in Lavinia's expression shifted. "You have plenty of other jewelry," she said. "You don't need that one right now." Alara kept her composure. "It was assigned to me. I'd already made plans around it." That was when the conversation changed shape entirely. "Why is it always about you?" Lavinia said, her tone sharpening. "Don't forget who I am. When I need something for the good of the crown, I expect cooperation, not negotiation." Alara felt the words land harder than she expected. "This isn't about attention," she replied quietly. "It's about respect." Lavinia stepped closer. "You should know your place. Everything in this palace exists because of the crown, and I decide what is needed." A silence stretched between them. Alara straightened, her face composed but pale. "I'll make arrangements," she said softly, and turned to walk away, leaving behind a tension that lingered long after the corridor had emptied. By the next morning, whispers had already begun moving through the staff quarters. No one knew the details, only that something had happened, and that it involved the two most photographed women in the kingdom. Most assumed, as was customary, that it would be resolved quietly behind closed doors. That assumption did not survive the day. Just before noon, Lavinia's personal aide arrived at the royal vault with two members of the design team, unannounced. The vault's senior custodian, a man named Osric, who had guarded the collection for nearly 20 years, stepped forward immediately. "May I ask who authorized this visit?" he asked. "These pieces are logged under Princess Ilara's name." The aide answered without hesitation. "We're here on the Queen Consort's instruction. The tiaras are needed for the upcoming events." Osric frowned. "Has the princess approved this? Protocol requires her sign-off." There was a pause before he spoke again, more firmly this time. "The princess is not the queen consort." Another aide added, "Her Majesty has made her wishes clear. The needs of the crown come first." Reluctantly, Osric signaled for the vault doors to be opened. Rows of jewels shimmered under the soft overhead lighting. The first piece removed was the larkspur circlet, the very tiara at the center of the confrontation the night before. But the retrieval did not stop there. Two more pieces were taken, both closely associated with Ilara. The Hollowmere lover's knot, a piece with deep sentimental ties to Anders's late mother, and the Windrose tiara, a lighter piece Ilara had worn on several public occasions since her marriage. All three were logged for temporary use under the Queen Consort's authority and sent for fitting. By the time senior staff learned what had happened, it was clear this had not been a simple oversight. To many inside the palace, it felt deliberate, less a request, and more a statement. The news reached Ilara at 4:30. She was in her private sitting room when Osric himself was quietly shown in, his expression tense in a way she had never seen from him before. "I'm very sorry to disturb you," he said, "but I felt you needed to know." He explained everything: the unscheduled visit, the instructions given in the Queen Consort's name, and the removal of not one, but 3 tiaras. Ilara's hands tightened in her lap. "She took them? Without asking me?" "Yes," Osric said. "I raised the concern myself. I asked whether you had approved it." Ilara exhaled slowly. For a moment, something sharp flashed across her face, but years of training pulled it back beneath the surface. She nodded. "Thank you for telling me. You did the right thing." After Osric left, Ilara sat alone for a long while. The anger was there, but beneath it sat something heavier, disbelief. An hour later, she rose and made her way to Lavinia's private office, where the Queen Consort sat surrounded by staff. The room fell quiet the moment Ilara entered. "May I speak with you?" she asked, her voice steady. Lavinia glanced up, visibly irritated. "Say it here. I have nothing to hide." Ilara stepped forward. "Why were my tiaras taken without my permission? I told you I was making arrangements for the one you asked about. You took 2 more without a word." "I took what was needed," Lavinia said coolly, "because you were behaving as though you were already queen." A murmur moved through the room. Ilara held her ground. "Those pieces mean something to me. There is a protocol. There is respect." Lavinia let out a short laugh. "Respect? You seem to forget who wears the crown." "I don't ask. I decide." "This isn't about power," Ilara replied. "It's always about power," Lavinia said, leaning back in her chair. The staff stood frozen as the exchange continued. Ilara openly challenged in front of people who worked for her. Still, she did not raise her voice. "You took 3 tiaras. Not one. That was unnecessary." "I took them because I could," Lavinia said. Silence filled the room. Ilara took a breath. "Then understand this," she said quietly. "This will not be forgotten." She turned and walked out, her expression calm, her hands trembling only once the door had closed behind her. That evening, a quiet knock came at Ilara's door. It was Lady Miriam Ashcombe, a senior courtier known for her loyalty to protocol and her closeness to the wardrobe department. "I wouldn't have come unless it mattered," Miriam said. "I was told something by the fitting team. The Windrose tiara isn't meant for Her Majesty's use at all. It's being prepared for someone else, Lavinia's granddaughter, from her first marriage. A private appearance, not an official event. No royal duty attached to it at all. The words landed like a blow. Royal jewels were never loaned out for personal family matters, let alone to someone with no working royal role. This was not about necessity. It was a message. That night, with Anders away on a diplomatic assignment in the north, Tiara sat alone with her children. Her son, only 7, noticed first. "Mummy, are you all right?" She forced a smile and told him she was only tired. But children sense more than adults give them credit for, and long after they had fallen asleep, Tiara sat by herself in the quiet of the nursery, holding her composure together by sheer discipline. When Anders finally returned 2 days later than expected, the entire palace seemed to exhale. Their 2 children ran to him the moment they saw him crossing the courtyard. For a brief, unguarded moment, Tiara allowed herself a real smile. It didn't last. That night, once the household had gone quiet, Anders closed the door to their private quarters and turned to look at his wife properly for the first time in days. He didn't need to ask. Her shoulders told him enough. "You don't look all right," he said gently. "What happened?" She told him everything. The corridor, the vault, the confrontation in front of the staff, and finally, the detail that had cut the deepest. The Windrose tiara, taken not for the crown, but for a private family favor. "That tiara helped me find my footing when I first joined this family," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't taken for duty. It was taken to make a point." Anders said nothing for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and resolute. "This does not end here." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Anders was already awake, his decision made. There would be no waiting. By 9 o'clock, he and Tiara stood outside King Frederick's private study, unannounced and unscheduled. The king's secretary looked up, startled. "You're not on today's schedule." "I know," Anders said evenly. "We'll wait." Minutes later, King Frederick arrived, a folder tucked beneath his arm, stopping short at the sight of them. "This isn't like you," he said, studying their faces. "Come in." Once the door had closed, Anders spoke first. "This concerns a serious breach of protocol." He explained everything, calmly and without embellishment: the vault, the missing pieces, the confrontation, and finally, the detail about the Windrose tiara's intended destination. Frederick's expression darkened with each detail. "That is highly inappropriate," he said finally. "This should not have happened." "I don't want conflict," Tiara said quietly. "I only want the role I hold to be respected." "And clarity," Anders added. "This cannot happen again." Frederick sat in silence for a long moment before rising from his chair. "I understand," he said, "and I agree completely." He reached for the phone on his desk and asked, in a measured voice, for the Queen Consort to be brought to his study at once. When Lavinia arrived minutes later, her composure faltered only slightly at the sight of Anders and Tiara still seated. "What is this about?" she asked. "I've been informed of the removal of 3 tiaras from a vault," Frederick said, "including pieces under Tiara's care, without her consent." "I was ensuring respect for the crown," Lavinia replied. "Those pieces belong to the institution. Acting for the crown does not mean bypassing protocol," Frederick said, his tone final. "With immediate effect, all 3 tiaras will be returned to the vault. There will be no exceptions." He paused. "And you will not wear a tiara at either of the upcoming engagements." The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, Lavinia's confidence visibly cracked. After a long moment, she nodded. "Very well. If that is your decision." "It is," Frederick said, before turning to Tiara with a softened expression. "I'm sorry you were placed in this position. It should never have reached this point." Within hours, all 3 tiaras were quietly returned to the vault. No official statement was ever issued. When the author's reception took place days later, observers noted that Queen Consort Lavinia wore no tiara at all, appearing instead in a simple emerald necklace. Commentators speculated about a change in personal style. None guessed the real reason. Weeks later, at a formal state banquet, Crown Princess Tiara entered the room wearing the larkspur circlet, resting lightly on her head, understated yet unmistakably hers. She did not wear it for admiration. She wore it as a quiet reminder of boundaries honored and of the kind of strength that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. Some crowns, as it turned out, are not simply given. They are earned.